Competence, or is it malice? Is it actually a civil war or just conflicting priorities? You may see this inside of your company. The tech failure case study that I've been talking about as part of this series, we saw that very clearly. You could see there were 3 different companies represented because this particular company started out as an independent firm, then it was bought, then it was sold to another big corporation, and there were people that had worked for all 3 of those different companies as part of that. You could see the different value systems, the different styles, the different expectations. Another example of that would be when I was at Hughes Aircraft, one of the things that we were taught was 1 step ahead, you're a leader, 3 steps ahead, you're a martyr. There was a certain mindset that went into how we approach things. When I went to work for McDonnell Douglas nearly 20 years later, there was a clear difference between those of us that had just hired in from the outside and those that worked there. Now, there was a lot of other cultural mashups going on. We'll talk about that at another time. The point I wanted to make here is there were 4 of us that had worked for Hughes Aircraft early in our careers, and we all identified each other pretty quickly when we were sitting in briefings, when we were talking about how to approach problem solving, when there were certain habits and whatnot that we had developed that were part of the Hughes culture, but part of the value system, that were so apparent that we recognized each other as Hughes Aircraft alums, many years down the road. And I could see this within this failing company that we've been talking about in this series. So we had one group of people that had come from a very large technology company that was really more about buying tech from other people, tended to be kind of kludgy because it went back to the early days. Their roots were in the 1950s style of product design. Very little human factors. It's just like utilitarian. They let the engineers design it and put it out in the marketplace. Didn't have the designers making it pretty or making it easy to use or something that was fit in the hand correctly. Very intuitive is the word that we use now. Didn't have any of that, and that showed in their attitudes about how they approach things. There was another group that had been from the current ownership corporate parent that again had a very different attitude towards things. They were very by the book, by the numbers, cut and dried, what more people oriented. Right? They had more concern about how were people doing, and there was this clash of culture between those 2, and also the third group, which went back to the old entrepreneurial company, which were really about just do whatever it takes to get it done. Right? It was messier. It wasn't as formalized process. It's like, hey, let's experiment. Let's just keep trying, iterate, problem solve, great, move on to the next one. Now, one of the common threads, which we touch on in a different video, is everybody was a firefighter because that was how careers were made. And it just made everything so foggy. And that's why I like this night to be able to talk to you about this. It's so foggy. You see the moon up here hiding in the fog up above, and get some fog on in the background, watching the fog blow in off of the Pacific Ocean, standing here at one of my favorite dead ends. Great place to go hiking down the road here, but it gets so foggy, it's unclear, right? You get this mist that keeps going across. Like they say, the fog of war, the fog of the battle is constantly blowing through and muddying the waters. People can't see clearly because they're looking at it from different perspectives. And it starts to look like one company culture is mounting a civil war against another company culture. And it made it very, very difficult to get stuff done because of those differences in value systems, differences in how they approach things, and the fact that leadership had never fixed that. That's one of the major failings of mergers and acquisitions. They don't integrate properly with one company to another. See that in large companies, see that in small companies. I had years ago, I interviewed the CEO of a company, regional company in the Midwest, and their growth strategy was acquiring other companies, and they were doing phenomenal. And it seemed unusual because it's a relatively small company, still family owned, but they got really good at the acquisition and integration. That became their key skill at the leadership level. Identify what's going to be a good fit, what's a market they should play in. And they made some mistakes along that. They tried expanding out into different product lines that seemed related, but they found out later, you know what, that wasn't a good choice, so they ended up selling that back off. But they got really good at how do we integrate people from this one team, this one company into our culture. And as they went along and learned new things, it's like, well, is there something that we can change? Do we need to change this culture? And the company that's been the subject of our case study, they were unable to do that. They were never able to merge cultures, which contributed to their downfall because their leadership team and their managers and their employees were in 3 different factions, all fighting against each other. I've seen this happen in Fortune 500 companies where you have 40, 50 companies that have been acquired and slammed together over anywhere from 1 to 3 decades, and nobody plays well, and it doesn't work that well. In this small company, because it was small, it made it so clear, and the problems that it caused, the way that it affected the financials and the performance of the company and the individuals was much, much clearer, much more obvious and immediate than it can be in a big company, right? Big organizations have their own inertia. Small companies, no, you know that, right? As an owner of your own business, what happens today affects tomorrow. And we could see that play out really rapidly. And it was one of the things that we needed to fix, but could not get the leadership team to focus on. That the people from the current parent company had a very different operating philosophy than the people that had come, that were still with the company, especially in leadership positions from the previous ownership, versus the people that had been with the company for 30 years, in some cases, that still had that original entrepreneurial culture. And they clashed. They clashed big time. They worked against each other. They undermined each other. And it was like watching a civil war. And at times, it really begged the question, is this incompetence or is this malice? Are these people actually trying to make the company fail by actively undermining things that need to be done, changes that need to be made, because they're working to a different set of priorities that were never integrated into the current company, the current structure of the company, as opposed to, is it just incompetence from the standpoint of not having the mindset, not having the wherewithal to understand that, look, this is the way things need to be done today, not the way they were under this former company. The policy that we had 20 years ago is no longer in effect today. Here's why we do it. So it's that kind of thing. So training's part of it, mentorship's part of it, and it's something you need to watch out for, because as you're hiring people in your company as well, it's like, what was their prior experience and what are they bringing in terms of mindset that's going to be helpful or is going to be a block? And is it something that is actually intended malice, or is it something that's just incompetence from the standpoint of management and leadership in order to be able to integrate those mindsets, those skills, those people, those teams into enough of a coherent and common value system that when they have disagreements, they can flesh them out in a way that's productive and healthy for the company. So, food for thought. Thanks for being part of Wolfe's Watch. Appreciate you. I'm Wolfe, and I'm howling at the moon in the fog. See you on the trail.